Hello friends, welcome to Ruslan Belov's channel. Today's episode is dedicated to analyzing the situation on Ukrainian territory as of November 20th, 2025. Many significant events have occurred over the past 24 hours, so let's proceed directly to their examination. The most discussed topic of recent hours has undoubtedly become the so-called Trump Initiative. This document, consisting of 28 provisions, represents a proposal for peaceful resolution of the confrontation between Ukraine and Russia. Throughout yesterday and the past day, various information leaks, details and specifics regarding this document began to emerge, although there has been no official publication yet, and presumably only representatives of Trump's circle and certain Ukrainian officials are familiar with it. Despite the absence of official disclosure, some details are already known. According to available data, Trump, together with the United States and a number of European powers, are ready to officially recognize Crimea and Donbass as Russian territories at the state level. At the same time, the document contains no requirement for Ukraine to recognize these territories as part of Russia. This remains at the discretion of the Ukrainian side. You can choose any position, but individual Western countries will implement such recognition regardless of Ukrainian preferences. Additionally, the question regarding Ukraine's military potential is being discussed. Initially, there were reports about the need to reduce Ukrainian armed forces by half. Later, this information was clarified. According to the latest information, the Ukrainian side must reduce the size of its army by 2.5 times. Specific calculations have even appeared, according to which after the completion of the military operation, the Ukrainian army should not exceed 300 to 400,000 people. Additionally, various restrictions on armaments are being introduced, including long-range systems capable of reaching Moscow and St. Petersburg. Limits are also being established on the presence of foreign military contingents, including NATO equipment and aviation, among other things. One of the key conditions is granting Russian language official state status, as well as restoring the rights of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church connected with the Moscow Patriarchate. Individual analysts, including those supporting Ukraine, characterize this document not simply as a plan, but as a variant of capitulation. This is described as a minimal form of capitulation to the Russian Federation. Zelensky and some pro-Ukrainian experts called this initiative a maximalist approach to implementing Russian interests. Yesterday, Zelensky was in Turkey meeting with Erdogan and planned to meet with Stephen Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, but the latter cancelled the meeting at the last moment. According to available data, the cancellation occurred after it became known that Zelensky arrived with his own European plan, which differs radically from the American proposal and contains unclear provisions. Witkoff considered it inappropriate to hold the meeting under such circumstances. You have the right to demonstrate your plan to anyone, but not to us, since it doesn't interest us at all. As a result, yesterday's meeting with Zelensky didn't take place with anyone, and he was probably forced to return to Ukraine. As we discussed just yesterday, high-ranking American officials arrived on Ukrainian territory. Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll and Chief of Staff, or similar position, Randy George. These two military officials were supposed to explain to Zelensky the essence of the plan, explain the mechanisms of its implementation and further steps. After the meeting with Zelensky, they should today or tomorrow morning proceed to Russian territory. The exact route of their travel to Russia is still unclear, possibly through Belarus or through Poland, but these are already details. At the moment, information is coming in that Zelensky will reject, decline and disagree with the proposed plan. This is apparently his current position. However, besides statements, desires and preferences of Zelensky, there are other factors deserving attention. First of all, this is the expanding corruption scandal on Ukrainian territory. Apparently, there were hints that more information will appear on this matter in the near future. Today, a very interesting event occurred concerning the work of the Verkhovna Rada. The Speaker of the Rada, Stefan Chuk, who according to the Russian interpretation of Ukrainian legislation is the only legitimate person on Ukrainian territory. The Russian Federation recognizes only his legitimacy. Today suspended the activities of the Verkhovna Rada. Officially, this is justified by corruption schemes involving ministers. The impression is created that the Rada has temporarily frozen its work until additional clarifications are provided. Perhaps subsequent comments will concern the formation of a new government or something similar. Everything naturally depends on what Zelensky will say tonight, whether he agrees with the American plan or not. If he agrees, certain actions will follow. Some Ukrainian deputies have already shared possible scenarios for the development of events. For example, Deputy Anna Skorokhod stated that in case of Zelensky accepting the plan, a temporary government will be formed that will prepare the country for elections. Then this temporary government or responsible person will conduct negotiations with Russia and subsequently sign a peace agreement. It's important to understand that this person or representative must be recognized as legitimate by at least the Russian Federation and the USA for successful completion of negotiations. Judging by how negotiations are being structured, Europe's opinion will not be taken into account. This is an extremely important point, since it would hardly be possible for the European Union, USA, and Russia to simultaneously approve one candidate for all these procedures. Consequently, Europe probably won't be asked about who will head the temporary government. It is precisely this government and its leader who will sign all documents. The question of nuances remains. Will documents be signed before or after elections, or both before and after? A two-stage process is possible, first by the temporary government, then by the legitimately elected president. Constitutional changes are also forthcoming. Trump's 28-point plan provides for removal from the Ukrainian constitution of mentions of NATO and Ukraine's aspiration to join this organization. Most importantly, if Ukraine will adjust its borders, this must also be recorded in the constitution. However, I repeat, according to the current Ukrainian constitution, border adjustment is impossible. This is probably the caveat in Trump's plan that Ukraine is not obligated to recognize these adjustments. The whole world will recognize them, and you act as you wish. You'll simply live with it. Well, we await this evening. We await the speech of Ukraine's President Zelensky. He will definitely speak and comment on the situation, and everything will become clear from this comment. But regardless of what and how Zelensky will say, just recently an interview took place with the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Budanov. His words sound as follows: "The upcoming winter will be very difficult. Ukrainians will be able to survive it, and the real window for negotiations will open only in early or mid-February. That is, according to the assessment of Ukrainian intelligence and Budanov, hostilities will definitely continue in December and January, and real negotiations will begin in mid or early February. However, if we consider the pace of advance that we observe along the front line, by mid-February Gulyapol, Velikaya Mikhailovka, Novopavlovka, Pokrovsk, Smirnograd, and probably Konstantinovka, Siversk, Lyman, and Kupiansk may fall. In fact, significant advancement to the west will occur, and here the question arises, won't the Russian Federation decide by February, when according to Budanov a window for negotiations will appear, to tighten its requirements? Regarding this, I think no one can give absolute guarantees now. Perhaps this is exactly what the Ukrainian side is seeking, for the Russian Federation to come as close as possible to its requirements on the ground, and only then agree. Of course, when the Russian side reaches, say, the border of the Donetsk region in battles without a negotiation process, and the Ukrainian side agrees when the Russian side lines up along the border, there is a high probability that the Russian Federation will tighten requirements by creating additional conditions and demands that the Ukrainian side will have to meet. This may lead to a situation when negotiations begin again, conflicts, plan changes, which may extend the military operation for an indefinite period. In any case, we will observe the development of the situation, and for now, let's move to the front line. Let's start with the Zaporizhzhia sector. Today, various adjustments are again coming from there. The map has undergone significant changes. This is how the map looked yesterday, November 19, 2025. Data came in that Russian units had only secured positions in the settlement of Veseloye. It was also reported that the Russian army had only entered the territory of Zaporizhzhia. Although speaking about Zaporizhzhia, already yesterday the first footage was published showing Ukrainian soldiers swiftly running from the territory of Zaporizhzhia toward Gulyapol with all their strength, with all their might, sparing no effort. I haven't seen anyone run so fast during the military operation. Individual experts interpreted these frames as confirmation that Zaporizhzhia had already fallen. Today, additional information appeared from this sector. According to the latest adjustments, the settlement of Zaporizhzhia came under full and confident control of Russian armed forces. Today, a number of experts made adjustments based on video materials showing how combat operations proceeded for this small village. By tradition, in the final seconds of video materials published by this resource, one can observe Russian soldiers raising flags in various parts of the settlement. One flag was raised in the very northern part of Zaporizhzhia, the second in the very southern part, so that there would be no doubt that the entire settlement completely came under the control of Russian armed forces. Moreover, today pro-Ukrainian cartographers are also making very significant and important adjustments, according to which forward units of Russian armed forces managed to enter the territory of the settlement of Zelensky from the north and secure positions. Also, Russian units approached closely to the settlement of Chervonoy. These two settlements will become important and main targets of this week. The Russian side will try to clear both settlements, straighten the front line from Malinovka through Marfapol, Zelensky, Chervonoye and Zaporizhzhia, and already from the east advance further toward Gulyapol. On the other hand, pro-Ukrainian cartographers today provide another very important and interesting adjustment. If you look at this map, you can immediately notice a very large grey zone in the area of Zaporizhzhia. According to this grey zone and adjustment, Ukrainian armed forces no longer have confident control and stable positions on the territory of this settlement. The distance from it to Gulyapol is approximately 1.5 kilometers. There is already information that Russian units are located approximately 1 kilometer from Gulyapol, which is actually a negligible distance, given the pace of advance that we can observe from the east military grouping. Also, the Russian army is gradually advancing west, from Ravnopol toward Varvarovka, to physically cut the N08 highway. Everything is proceeding according to a certain scenario, and the situation is not deviating from this scenario. Russian units have already approached Gulyapol closely. Combat operations for this city will begin in the very near future. There is an extremely high probability that the Ukrainian side will not be able to hold the defense in this sector. Next, we move to the settlement of Pokrovsk, from where footage and adjustments are also coming. This is how the map looked yesterday, November 19, 2025. Today the map has undergone changes and already looks as follows. According to the latest adjustments, the Russian army managed to improve its positions directly in the northeastern part of Mirnograd. In fact, the northern Mirnograd citadel came almost under full confident control. At least 50% is already controlled. I think that the remaining 50% are already in the grey zone, or less than 5% remains under AFU control. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reports that the Russian army continues, or is already completing the clearing of the settlement of Rovnoye. Also today, the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed the complete clearing of the Shakhtarsky micro-district. Next, we move to the Siversk and Lyman direction, where hostilities continue. Regarding Siversk, no new information was received today. I remind you that according to the latest data, the Russian army was already recorded in the southeastern part of the city. Already approximately 25% of Siversk is under the control of Russian armed forces. It's still difficult to speak about the degree of control, but in these frames, 2 Russian saboteurs or assault troops can be seen moving freely at this point. Based on these frames, coloring and adjustment were made. That is, the first frames of objective control have already appeared, confirming the presence of Russian units in the southeastern part of Lyman. Of course, with each passing day, the Russian army will try to improve its positions in this direction. Slightly to the northwest, from the Lyman side, much important news is coming. As you can see, there are confirmed adjustments, as well as unconfirmed adjustments. Let's start with the unconfirmed ones. Today, according to neutral cartographic services, Russian armed forces, after a small regrouping, again began an offensive, clearing Yampol. At the present moment, by the end of November 20th, the Russian side already controls approximately 40 to 35% of this settlement. Also, Russian units have already approached closely to the T0513 highway, physically cutting it in another place. Several days ago, there was information about physical control over the section between the intersection of highways, T0514 and T0513. This confirms the theory that the Russian army will move further toward the settlement of Dibrova, trying to encircle Ukrainian units located in the area of the Lyman water area, this small sector. The most important footage today comes from the territory of the settlement of Lyman itself. Based on this video material, pay attention to what adjustment is being made. These frames were published today by the Ukrainian side, and here one can observe how FPV drone operators of Ukrainian armed forces strike buildings and structures in the southeastern part. In these frames, one can see at least 2 Russian soldiers trying to change position between strikes. 2 soldiers were recorded at this point. Based on these frames, coloring and adjustment were made. That is, the first frames of objective control have already appeared, confirming the presence of Russian units in the southeastern part of Lyman. Of course, with each passing day, the Russian army will try to improve its positions in this direction. On the Volchansky direction, the Russian army is gradually beginning to move toward the settlement of Volchia. Today, a number of pro-Ukrainian and neutral cartographers are making colorings in this sector. This is how the map looked yesterday, November 19th. Today the map already looks as follows. Also, Russian units are approaching the final stage of clearing southern Volchansk. Probably, in the next week or 2, southern Volchansk will be completely cleared, and then the Russian army will begin moving at full strength toward the settlement of Bely Kolodets. But all these movements, maneuvers, and operations entirely and completely depend on what decision Zelensky makes today, what he will do, whether he agrees with the requirements or not. But if you look at the situation, especially from the point of view of energy stability and integrity of Ukraine, there is a high probability that Zelensky may agree, at least with the goal of gaining at least a little time. After all, agreeing to the conditions that will be announced today doesn't mean mandatory fulfillment. Promising doesn't mean marrying. Therefore, today he can say anything, and in 2 weeks the picture may change. Of course, probably according to this point of the plan out of 28 points, the key and most important event will be the withdrawal of troops. Surely this process will have some deadline, a final point when troops must be withdrawn. But this time period from today until the scheduled troop withdrawal can bring anything, and plans may break down again. And all these days, for example, the Russian Federation won't be able to or won't strike critical infrastructure objects or something like that. That's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and all the best to you.